Today is an important day for spiritual seekers in general. Irrespective of traditions and faith systems and the different streams of spiritual tradition that we belong to, the day on which we remember the timeless succession of spiritual preceptors who have maintained this ancient spiritual tradition is very important for all of us. I would say a few things about why we celebrate Vyasa Purnima as Guru Purnima. Vyasa was a great ancient sage who lived perhaps around, we can't say with any definite historical proof, but maybe around 3000 or 4000 BC, who codified, who classified, and who edited the entire Vedic literature. Vyas is the dhatu, which is a Sanskrit root, which means editing, classifying, and so on, analyzing. Now, Vyasa was a great teacher, and when Vyasa was born, the entire Vedic literature was one whole. And these Vedas were not taught by writing or by any other means. It was taught through oral tradition exclusively. The teachers used to repeat, and the students used to repeat again after them, and this way they used to memorize the entire Vedic literature. So all the four Vedas put together was a huge corpus of canonical spiritual literature. So according to the Puranic accounts that you find in the mythological books, Vyasa found that in the coming centuries, people will find it a bit difficult to memorize things. Because human memory is slowly fading, getting reduced. You can find today, if we become too dependent upon calculators and computers, then you find many of the inherent faculties of the human brain, human mind, slowly get atrophied. This is happening right now in front of our own eyes in the primary schools. Now, Vyasa found out that in the coming millennia, people won't find it easy to memorize the entire canonical literature, the four Vedas, which constituted one single corpus in his days. So, he classified this Vedic literature into four groups, which he called a single Veda. So Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Sama Veda, and Athar Veda. These are the four Vedas. They are not completely independent of each other. But in every Veda, there are a few portions which are special to themselves. I mean, not found in other Vedas. But otherwise, many of the teachings and hymns and passages are found in all the four Vedas. Now, the biggest of them was Rig Veda, which he taught to one of his disciples. His name was Paila. He had four important disciples. There were many disciples, but four of them were very brilliant, and he chose the senior-most of them, Paila, as the one who is going to preserve the tradition of Rig Veda. So he taught him Rig Veda. Next was Yajur Veda, which he taught to another one of his disciples, that is Vaishambhayana. The third Sama Veda he taught to Jaimini. The fourth one, Atharva Veda, he taught to Sumanto. So because of this particular act, contribution to Vedic heritage, he came to be known as Vyasa, means the codifier, the one who edited, the one who classified the one who preserved the entire Vedic tradition. So that was how he came to be known as Vyasa. So all our traditional spiritual teachings and ideas, philosophical systems are all enshrined in the Vedic literature. Upanishads, from which Vedantic tradition emerged, is also part of the Vedic tradition, Vedic literature. So, in a way, he is the father figure of our tradition and heritage. Therefore, he is known and considered to be the Adi Guru, the first great teacher of our heritage. So, the day on which he was born came to be regarded as Vyasa Purnima Day, Guru Purnima Day, the day on which we remember our great Guru. This is the historical background. Now, what do we mean by Guru? Maybe this is a special concept to Oriental traditions, and it has got much more deeper significance in the Indian Vedantic Hindu tradition. It's something very interesting. To give an idea of how significant, how important this Guru ideal is, I can give one quotation from the Gita, which everyone, all of you must have read, at least most of you. Gita is one of the fundamental books of Vedanta. At the end of this book, the 18th chapter, Lord Krishna gives an interesting instruction to his disciple Arjuna. So he has taught all these 18 chapters. He had taught all the 4 Vedas, different spiritual practices and different practices of meditation. All he taught to his disciple, Arjuna. And then he makes a very interesting statement. Idam te na tapaskaya na bhaktaya kadachana na cha asushave vakyam na mam abhyasuyati. It's a very interesting na yo mam abhyasuyati. That's a complete form. The meaning is very interesting. Just imagine a great teacher teaches a very profound spiritual metaphysical tradition to his disciple. A teaching that saves his life, this teaching that brings the light of spiritual knowledge into the mind of the disciple. And then says, don't teach this to anybody who doesn't practice self-restraint, self-control, who doesn't have internal and external discipline. Never teach them. Again, idante na bhaktaya. Never teach this to a person who has no devotion to the scripture, no reverence to the teacher and the scripture. Then, third instruction, never teach this to a person who is jealous of me, jealous of Lord Krishna. Suppose you go to a college, you may not do, but some students, you go to a college and a professor with great effort and pain teaches some very important lessons. There are some very great, wonderful professors. That's why we have got wonderful scientists, philosophers and thinkers. Suppose a great teacher, some of you may belong to that category, where teaching may not be just a profession, but the holiest and most rewarding job from a spiritual point of view. And then you teach something and you come out to the classroom, and one fellow says, oh, this professor is good for nothing, he doesn't know anything. I know better than him. Suppose you overhear this student makes this wonderful statement. You feel, I should never have taken up this teaching profession. I would have gone for digging the pits or some kind of better job. At least if you are an electrician, if you won't feel mentally crushed. If somebody is a great musician, I have myself seen great musicians. Even in the congregation I have seen some wonderful people who have devoted a whole life to music. Suppose they teach music to one student. And when afterwards the student says, he doesn't know really. I know better than him. Now that's why Lord Krishna says, never teach this great spiritual truth to a person who is jealous of you, who cannot appreciate you. Because if a student cannot appreciate the subject that's being taught and also the teacher who is teaching, the student can never excel in that area which he studying. So our success, the effect of our learning is in direct proportion to the reverence and respect, the application that we show in our attitude to the teacher and also to the subject that's being taught. So Lord Krishna says, never teach a person who has no reverence and respect to the science, to the subject that's being taught, and also the person who is teaching. You can easily imagine if you drag all kinds of people to learn music, people who are not interested in music, they will become your enemies and they will become enemies of music also. Those who are not interested in the discipline, if you force them to learn a subject in which is totally disinterested, you consider it a great punishment. So again, those who don't have self-control, those who do not have inner and outer discipline in their life, don't teach them. And the point is, you find here a connection, a link between the student and the teacher, a link that passes through the subject that's being transmitted. But this link remains intact only when there is a good harmonious relationship between the student and the teacher, and if that harmonious relationship is bridged, linked through the cementing factor of the subject, reverence for subject, respect for the subject, also becomes respect and respect for the teacher, and that helps, that becomes a very important factor in developing of that particular discipline. So great philosophers are born because they had great teachers who taught philosophy. So this is a very intricate aspect of the Guru ideal, which is inherent in certain traditions, but should be emphasized in certain other traditions. So the definition of the word Guru goes like this. Gushabdastu andhakarasya rushabdastu nirodhakaha andhakara nirodhitva guruhu iti abhidiyade. It means a simple, I shall just explain. Gushabdaha to andhakarasya. The word Gu stands for darkness, ignorance, absence of light. Now, Ru means a person or an agency, some instrument that removes this darkness. Now, light is not a result of any external agency. Light only removes darkness. Light's function is only limited to this, to remove darkness. Once darkness is removed, then the truth is revealed. Because truth is self-effulgent. Truth is inherent. Truth is eternal. Truth cannot be produced, manufactured, or brought in, or taught, or studied. Truth is something that's manifest from within ourselves. It is self-manifested. But there could be some obstacles sometimes in our mind, which is darkness, ignorance. This darkness should be removed, and darkness could be removed only through light. And the teacher takes the student by the hand and leads him to the path leading to light by trying to remove darkness. The success or failure depends very much upon the fitness of the student. In the Vedantic tradition, it is fitness of the student that is the primary factor in Vedantic tradition. Because you find Jesus had very few disciples. Buddha had very few. Siddhartha had very few disciples. Shankaracharya had very few disciples. You see, if these great teachers could have transformed the entire community, just imagine if Jesus could transform the entire Roman Empire into Christians, the task would have been very simple. Buddha could have taught the entire world the truth of ahimsa. He didn't do. He couldn't do. They won't do that. Sri Ramakrishna was living in a city where there were several hundreds of thousands of people. But he had only 16 monastic disciples and maybe more than 100 very great householder disciples. But city had a few hundreds of thousands of people. Now, the point is, to the extent we become spiritually fit, to that extent we learn the spiritual ideal from the teacher. When we go to an ocean which is full of water, the amount of water that we can carry from the ocean depends upon the size of the container that we are carrying in our hands. If you have a small glass, we can only carry one glass full of water. If you have a huge pot, we can carry one huge pot full of water. So the second principle in the Guru ideal is spiritual fitness should be attained, and spiritual fitness should be attained only through self-effort and God's grace. And Guru's role is to make you plug to the eternal source of God's grace. So a teacher in Vedantic tradition is like it's like a plug, so to speak. There should be an outlet. The plug should be linked to the outlet. Then electricity flows. Otherwise not. If the plug is not fixed to the outlet, then it's a dead wire and a piece of maybe some kind of something, which is practically nothing. So every guru is like an agent, like an instrument, a link through which the all-pervading reality, God's grace in the devotional tradition flows towards you. And the amount of its manifestation, the amount of its usefulness depends upon our own spiritual fitness. Through our own effort, we make our mind ready for the grace of God. And when our mind becomes ready, then the flow of the grace of God that flows into our mind becomes effective. This is a second principle in the Guru tradition. Another important ideal of this Guru aspect of this Guru ideal is this Guru ideal, in a way, is the one sole explanation factor to the question as to why this ancient Vedantic tradition were preserved in India for thousands of years. If you read the history of India, you find hundreds of invasions, hundreds of social cataclysms, innumerable cataclysmic social changes, revolutions took place in India, transformations. Now, in spite of all this great tradition was preserved. If you go to any of the ancient cradles of civilization, there are wonderful things still being preserved, but in museums, in the archives, and so on. That living tradition that produced a pyramid, or the living tradition that preserved ancient Babylonian, Assyrian, or Sumerian civilization, the living tradition is not now found, except in books and museums and archaeological works. There may be stray exceptions perhaps. That's because in many of the ancient civilizations, this succession of the guru, teacher, tradition was absent. Because a teacher not just teaches, but transmits wisdom. Transmission is different from teaching. Transmission means transplanting. Teaching may or may not work. But when a great wisdom is transplanted into another person, it really begins to function. It may take some time. It may take In Vedic tradition, it may take several lives, or it may take a few split seconds for the effect to manifest. The effect will manifest, but it all depends upon our own spiritual fitness. And spiritual fitness can be accomplished only by mental purity. Because we have in our mind different layers. These layers do not allow the spiritual truth to enter it directly. Skepticism, doubtfulness, and again the tendency to question everything. All these create different layers of obstacles which stand in the way of faith. So faith is incidentally a very important factor in the Guru tradition. Faith. Faith is sometimes interpreted in Western thought as something opposed to free will. And faith is sometimes interlinked to superstition, or what they call blind faith. You are told and you should believe, asking no questions. It is not that kind of faith that is meant here, because that kind of faith doesn't produce any good result. A faith which asks no questions doesn't produce any good result. Faith combined with a sincere quest for truth, a positive interpretation or understanding of what is meant by free will. I can give an example. In fact, the founder of the organization of which Vedanta Society is a branch, Swami Vivekananda, he was, to begin with, an agnostic. He was studying in a college where he had to study many of the books of British empiricists, utilitarians, J.S. Mill, Bentham, and so on, mind you. And free will was a very interesting, fashionable topic after the emergence of Darwinian evolutionists, and also Marxian humanists in the middle of 19th century. When Vivekananda went to Scottish Church College and Presidency College, books that taught you to ask questions and not to believe without asking questions were very popular and part of the popular syllabi. So Vivekananda, as a young man, was an agnostic who did not believe what he was told to believe without asking questions. And he went to Sri Ramakrishna. Now Sri Ramakrishna was a person who had not heard much about J.S. Mill or Bentham. But he had already experienced the essence of the highest spiritual wisdom, of which these systems of philosophy at the best may be called distorted versions. Now, Sri Ramakrishna, interestingly, did not expect his disciples to believe anything blindly, to believe blindly what he told them. So when this young man, Narendranath Datta, continued asking questions, Sri Ramakrishna was not angry. He was very pleased, because he knew a person with a sincere spiritual urge who wants to ask questions, not to show off his intellectual pretensions, but to understand certain things which he is not able to understand right now. That Sri Ramakrishna understood. So Sri Ramakrishna was happy. Intellectual arrogance could be very disastrous sometimes. The tendency to ask questions in the name of a pronounced opposition to blind faith can sometimes become very skeptical, disastrous, and destructive. It moves in a cycle. We ask questions and we don't really try to understand the answer. And then what happens? We will ask the same questions again. So skepticism becomes a highly negative mindset that blocks the flow of God's grace into our heart. Real intellectual quest takes you beyond skepticism, beyond doubt. It is like a straight line. It takes you beyond instinct, and it takes you beyond reason, and it takes you beyond itself, because real intellectual quest will enable you to understand the limitation of intellect. There is something higher than intellect. It's not real, which is really faith to be interpreted as inspiration. The higher inspiration goes beyond instinct and also beyond reason. But skepticism is a kind of perverted, distorted version of reasoning. Now, Sri Ramakrishna found Swami Vivekananda's tendency to ask questions was a creative, constructive urge, an attempt to transcend reason. So when Sri Ramakrishna taught him that reason is not everything, intellectual quest is not everything, there is a higher spiritual experience, he quickly understood. So that's why you find some of the greatest teachers in the world taught in the form of dialogues and parables. Because parables directly reflect life in society and family. Mere ethical teachings sometimes could be lifeless. So you find in the Bible the great parables. Just imagine the parable of the sower of the seed. I'm just taking one parallel example from Bible. The sower of the seed. It is nothing but a classic illustration of the principle of spiritual fitness of the disciple. Our mind is a field. If it is full of stones and thistles, and if it empty and dry and just full of rocks, you can imagine what happens. You can read the Bible. But if the mind is prepared, if it is fertile, if it is ready to accept and ready to practice, then whatever seeds are sown will produce the results. 100-fold, 1,000-fold, as the parable says. So one important creative aspect of the Guru ideal is, it is very rational, but it takes you beyond reason. Because real rational thinking will help us to understand the limitation of reason. Another aspect of the Guru ideal, which I want to, within a short time, just wanted to give some flashlights from a tradition. I can explain this in the light of a story from the Bhagavata Purana. It comes in the fourth skandha, or the fourth book, from 8 to 12 chapters, adhyayas we call, in 5 chapters. There's an interesting description of how this works in real life. I am taking this story from a very ordinary family setting. There was an ancient king. His name was Uttanapada. He had 2 wives, Suruji and Suniti. And the younger one, the Suruji, she had a son. His name was Uttama. And the elder one was Suniti. Her son was Dhruva. Dhruva is the hero of this particular story, mythological tale. So as it frequently happened in ancient times, when kings had more than one wife, there was some kind of family quarrel. So the son of the elder wife did not get enough affection from either the king, his father, or from the boy's stepmother. So something happened in the family, in the royal family, and Dhruva was hurt. He felt that his father, and also his stepmother, ill-treated him. And he was very much upset. He came to his mother, Suniti, crying and weeping. Now the mother tells him, look here, all your problems will vanish if you pray to the teacher of all teachers, the guru of all gurus, God himself. So you go and meditate upon God, Vishnu, Mahavishnu, and then you will have all the problems solved. So you can just see it's only a mythological story. In a family, there is a family problem. Little boy was hurt. He came to his mother, saying that his father and his stepmother ill-treated him. And the boy's mother, Sunidhi, tells him, these problems occur in family life, but ultimately there is only one solution to all the problems. That is God's grace, and God is the ultimate guru, the ultimate teacher, the one who solves our problems. Dhruva was a little boy, so he fully listened to this. He didn't question. Often we question when we are not really serious about what we are questioning about. But Dhruva was very earnest. He wanted a solution to his problem. He wanted that his father should treat him, show him affection, as he was showing affection to the stepmother's son. That's all. It's a small children, 5-year-old boy. So he went to the forest. Now, as he's walking through the forest, he's always contemplating and thinking, how I can meditate upon God. My mother asked me to meditate upon God. Now, I don't know how to meditate, because I'm a little boy. So he was wondering and worried. Where is God? He didn't know where God lived. He was walking through the forest. No, there was an ancient sage who frequently came to the rescue, the assistance of such spiritual seekers in ancient times. And this sage comes to him, appears before him. Look here. What's the matter with you? Dhruva says, no, this is my condition. I'm in my family. I was ill-treated by my father and my stepmother. Then Narada doesn't give any instruction immediately. In fact, Narada saw, the great philosopher saw the little boy walking at a distance. And there's a statement in the classical work, Aho Teja Kshatriyanam. This is a Sanskrit text which is Vyasa used in the story. Narada exclaims to himself, oh, what a determination. This little boy of 5-year-old is walking through forests. And it's all because he got an instruction from his mother. And his mother told him to realize God. And he fully believed, and he went to the forest. But is he really spiritually, is he really fit for this? Or is only childish prank? So I must test him. So Narada appeared and asked him. And when Dhruva explained the story, Narada told him, look here, you are a small boy. You go back to your home, your palace, play with your friends. These family problems always occur. You don't have to worry, take very seriously all these things. Narada was testing him, because he knew that whatever instructions he was going to give will be effective only if the disciple is fit and fully qualified to practice according to those instructions. So Narada goes on testing this boy. You go to your home, you play. These problems are very natural in all families. You should not take them very seriously. But Dhruva is fully determined. And you can read, those of you who are interested, you can read this in Sister Nivedita's books. You can find her in Cradle Tales of Hinduism and so on. Other books also you find. Now, when Narada found a boy fully determined, then he teaches him, instructs him. You should go this way, go to the bank of a river, sit there and meditate upon God and pray to God. All your problems will be solved. So it is said that within a very short time, this Dhruva got a vision of the Lord, and he gradually and later on he returned home and he had a happy life. He became a great emperor. Now, here you find how a teacher tests the student. before he gives instructions. But in modern times, it may not be possible. In such cases, what we should do, whatever instructions we have received, we must enrich those instructions. We must take the help of books, spiritual books, fellow spiritual seekers, those who are inclined to a spiritual life as all of us. And through discussion, we must enrich and reinforce our own spiritual tendencies. This is one important method that is given in our scriptures. There is a verse in one of our scriptures, Anadi Maya Supto Yudha Jiva Prabhuddhiti Ajamanidram Aswapnam Advaidam Buddhide Tada. In many of our books, a guru is depicted as a great teacher who comes and wakes you up. All of us are asleep. A guru doesn't bring a truth and put in our heads. What he does, he enables us to realize the truth within ourselves. He, as I said earlier, he removes the darkness. And when darkness is removed, you can see the object in front of us with our own eyes. So what a guru does is, he removes the darkness within us. He removes the darkness which is in the form of obstacles that stand in the way of our realizing the truth within ourselves. So in many of these books, there is an interesting depiction. A spiritual seeker is right now asleep. It's kind of spiritual sleep. We may be the most intellectually enlightened person, the most accomplished person, but we could be spiritually asleep, deep asleep. And there are many people, there are many mystics who were not academic scholars, but were spiritually awakened. So the role of a guru is to make the student to spiritually awaken and open his eyes and realize the truth within himself. The truth, as I said, doesn't come from outside. The truth is within ourselves. That's why Vivekananda defined religion is the manifestation of divinity already in man. It's already within us, man and woman. So every guru comes to us and plugs our system to a spiritual outlet so that the energy flows through that plug, through that instrument to ourselves. The source is elsewhere. That's why in spiritual tradition, we must always concentrate on the source. That is very important. We must concentrate, meditate upon the outlet, but we should also meditate upon the source. Because the source is all-pervading reality. In the Ramakrishna Vedanta tradition, in the tradition of Vedanta society especially, Sri Ramakrishna is the primary source. And Sri Ramakrishna himself said that he himself realized the supreme truth by the grace of Mother. So, you find the great teachings of the Vedas and Upanishads and Bhagavad Gita, all the great eternal scriptures. All these teachings of these great scriptures reflect in the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna's teachings constitute an embodiment of all these great teachings, all these eternal teachings. So when we meditate upon our teacher, we should also meditate upon the fact that the source comes from a higher source, and that source is eternal. All the great teachers, direct disciples, they all used to say that we are all different instruments through which Sri Ramakrishna's will functions. There is an interesting incident. It happened in Belur. Somebody told Swami Premanandaji. Swami Premanandaji was an outstanding disciple of Sri Ramakrishna. He was a very loving, wonderful person. People used to flock to him. And they said, oh, you have become so great. You have become so great. You have become everything. Then Swami Tattwamananda said, no, Sri Ramakrishna made us nothing. When we become nothing, we become everything. When the instrument loses its individuality, then it becomes a tool through which the eternal, the infinite manifests. If the instrument asserts its individuality, then the eternal, infinite, all-pervading reality, spiritual truth, will not manifest through the limit. It remains limited. The instrument by itself may be limited, but assumes an infinite proportion when it loses its own individuality and when its individuality merges with the eternal, universal individuality of spiritual tradition. In the Vedanta tradition, it is Sri Ramakrishna. It is a unique, wonderful system which has preserved an ancient religious spiritual tradition. In India's context, you'll be surprised to know, not only spiritual tradition, all that you find in India, great music, dance, even dance forms, many architectural things. In fact, the science of architecture that is practiced maybe in 3000 BC still is being preserved. In fact, there are families who continue the same tradition for at least 2000 years. Vedic sacrifices, Vedic chanting, music, then the Sanskrit literature, even Sanskrit grammar. I can give one example because I want to give a broad perspective of what is meant by Guru idea. Not only in spiritual tradition, but in general. Sanskrit is supposed to be the most precise, most scientific system of grammar. 8 chapters, each chapter divided into 4 padas, means 4 quarters, each quarter containing some petty small statements which you can never really make out. Is one statement. What do you make out of this? But it is a great statement which contains a great Sanskrit rule in Sanskrit grammar. The last called sutram, piti statement of Sanskrit grammar, Ashtadhyayi. It took its present form in 9th century BC. Panini was the one who codified it. It was taught exclusively through oral tradition. Virdiraji, Adeng Gunaga, Halanti, like that. The Ashtadhyayi Sutra Padas used to be taught. Teacher will repeat, student will repeat again and again. And remember, this is the modified Sanskrit grammar which is still prevalent. I am talking about the Sanskrit grammatical system of our times. I am not talking about Vedic grammar, which is at least 5,000 years older than Panini. Belongs to 8th millennium BC. Now, this Sanskrit grammatical system was taught orally by repetition. And those who used to learn this also used to meditate on the great teachers like Panini, Patanjali, Katyayana and all that. And they used to learn these great scriptures in the homes of the teachers by repeating, by showing great reverence and respect for this system. Without any respect and reverence, if you learn this, you will go mad, because these sutras can never be memorized unless you consider it something very sacred, because apparently it doesn't mean anything. You are taught the interpretations of these sutras later, which constitute several volumes, each volume the size of Encyclopedia Britannica. That is Patanjali's Mahabhashyam. It's so huge number of volumes, as big as Encyclopedia Britannica. Interpretations. But the book itself is very small, may run into maybe around 70-80 pages small size. Original sutra. It was taught through Guru tradition. I am just giving an example from grammar, not from spiritual tradition. Grammar. And you should remember, modern English grammar was standardized by Fowler and Hornby in the beginning of 20th century in England, and here later grammarians in America in maybe the later half of 20th century. So I'm just giving an example of the relevance and the extensiveness of the Guru ideal in tradition, in the tradition of learning and spiritual wisdom. Not only in spiritual sciences, but even in secular sciences. So I wanted to give you a broad idea of the Guru tradition, its influence and impact on ancient traditions. Thank you.